They say the greatest gift you can give your children is roots and wings. For nearly 4 decades, I nurtured those roots with unwavering devotion, believing that one day, when they spread their wings, they'd still remember where they came from. My name is Eleanor Prescott, and for 42 years, I believed that the sacrifices I made for my family, the sleepless nights, the depleted savings accounts, the dreams I set aside, would someday be acknowledged with simple gratitude and inclusion. I was painfully mistaken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The realization that family bonds can be more fragile than morning frost didn't come when my son Thomas forgot my 65th birthday. It didn't come when my daughter-in-law Vanessa asked me to watch their children 3 weekends in a row without so much as a thank you. It didn't even come when they remodeled their kitchen with Italian marble while I continued paying their monthly mortgage from my modest nursing pension. No, the moment that shattered my world arrived on a crisp November afternoon as I stood in Vanessa's immaculate foyer, holding a homemade cranberry bread, a family recipe passed down through 4 generations of Prescott women. Vanessa looked at me with those cool gray eyes, her manicured hand resting on the banister of the grand staircase I had helped them afford, and said, "We've been meaning to talk to you about Christmas this year, Eleanor. The Harringtons have invited us to their estate in Oakwood Hills. Very exclusive. Influential people will be there, people who can help Thomas's career. We think it would be best if you celebrated elsewhere this year." Then she lowered her voice as if sharing a confidence, though no one else was present. "Between us, Eleanor, these kinds of gatherings have certain expectations. About the guests, about presentation. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. After emptying my retirement savings to help with their down payment, after silently transferring $2,300 into their account every month for nearly 4 years, after babysitting their children while they vacationed in the Maldives, I wasn't polished enough to sit at their Christmas table. I wasn't the right kind of accessory for their social climbing. In that moment, standing on imported Spanish tile that my pension had indirectly purchased, something crystallized within me. If I wasn't family enough to share their holiday meal, perhaps I wasn't family enough to continue financing the roof over their heads. What happened in the days that followed changed everything. For them, certainly. But more importantly, for me. The journey I embarked upon led me through heartbreak and revelation to an unexpected destination: freedom. I never imagined my life's third act would unfold this way. At 67, I had pictured myself surrounded by family, perhaps joining Thomas and Vanessa for Sunday dinners, watching my grandchildren open presents under a Christmas tree that held ornaments I'd collected throughout my lifetime. Instead, I found myself alone in my modest Cape Cod on Sycamore Lane, nursing wounds that cut deeper than any I'd treated during my 30-year career at Meadowbrook General Hospital. My path to that pivotal moment began in Millfield, Connecticut, a town just large enough to support 3 elementary schools, but small enough that gossip traveled faster than the commuter train to Hartford. I'd worked as a pediatric nurse since graduating from nursing school, eventually becoming the head nurse of the pediatric oncology department. That's where I met Harold, my late husband, a kind-eyed radiologist with gentle hands and a laugh that echoed down hospital corridors. We married young, purchased our little Cape Cod with the blue shutters, and dreamed of filling it with children. Life, as it often does, had other plans. After years of disappointments and failed treatments, we were blessed with just one child, Thomas. From the moment they placed him in my arms, small and red-faced with a powerful set of lungs, I knew I would move heaven and earth for this boy. When Thomas was diagnosed with severe asthma at age 4, I scaled back my hours at the hospital to care for him. Those nights spent monitoring his breathing, the nebulizer's hum a constant companion, the rush to the emergency room when attacks were particularly severe, they forged a bond I believed unbreakable. Harold and I poured everything into giving Thomas the best life possible. We researched experimental treatments, drove 3 hours to specialist appointments, and transformed our home into an allergen-free haven. We sacrificed vacations to fund summer camps for asthmatic children where Thomas could feel normal among peers who also carried inhalers. When he showed remarkable academic potential, we hired tutors we couldn't really afford. When he expressed interest in sailing, Harold took weekend work at an urgent care facility to pay for lessons at the Coastal Yacht Club. Our lives orbited around Thomas's needs, his dreams, his future. Harold never lived to see Thomas graduate from Dartmouth College. A sudden aneurysm took him when our son was 22, leaving me a widow at 52 with a mortgage still to pay and a son in his final year of an expensive education. "Mom, this is the perfect time to downsize," Thomas suggested while home for his father's funeral. He gestured around our modest living room with the built-in bookshelves Harold had crafted by hand. "This place is too big for just you, and the market is strong right now. The proceeds could help with my last year of tuition and give you a fresh start. Something more manageable." I remember feeling a flicker of hurt at his pragmatism so soon after his father's death, at the casual suggestion that I abandon the only home we had ever shared as a family. But I brushed it aside. Grief affects people differently, I told myself. Thomas was always practical, like his father. He was thinking of solutions, of moving forward. "This is our home," I told him gently. "Your father built those shelves for my birthday. The height markers on the kitchen doorframe show every inch you grew. No, I'll pick up extra shifts instead." And that's exactly what I did. For the next 18 months, I worked 60-hour weeks, often taking the overnight shifts younger nurses avoided. By the time Thomas graduated with honors, I was exhausted, but immensely proud. He was the first in our family to receive a prestigious university education. As he accepted his diploma, I could almost feel Harold beside me, swelling with the same pride that threatened to burst my heart. "I did it, Mom," Thomas said, hugging me after the ceremony. "I couldn't have done it without you and Dad." Those words meant everything to me. But I would soon learn how quickly words can evaporate when ambition enters the picture, and how expensive gratitude becomes when measured against social advancement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas landed a prestigious job at Harrington Weiss and Associates, an architectural firm in Hartford. This meant he wouldn't have to move far away after graduation, which filled me with quiet joy. I continued working at Meadowbrook, where Dr. Samuel Montgomery had become the new chief of pediatrics. Dr. Montgomery was a widower who had lost his wife to breast cancer 5 years earlier. He had grown children who lived out of state, and over time, we developed a warm professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared dedication to our young patients. "Eleanor, you're the backbone of this department," he would often say. "I don't know what we'd do without your institutional knowledge and steady hand." His words were a balm during a period when I was still adjusting to life without Harold, finding my footing as a widow while maintaining my professional responsibilities. There were moments I caught Dr. Montgomery looking at me with something beyond collegial appreciation, but I wasn't ready to acknowledge such possibilities. My focus remained on my son and my career. During Thomas's second year at the firm, he met Vanessa Harrington. Yes, Harrington, as in the founding partner's youngest daughter. She was striking, with sleek dark hair and the kind of polished appearance that spoke of private schools and European vacations. She worked in the firm's marketing department, tasked with attracting the high-end commercial clients that had become their specialty. "Mom, I want you to meet Vanessa," Thomas said when he brought her to dinner at my home for the first time. "She's incredible. Stanford MBA, speaks 3 languages, and she's helping me navigate the politics at the firm." Vanessa was perfectly pleasant that evening, though I noticed her appraising glance as she took in my living room with its comfortable but worn furniture. The crocheted Afghan herald's mother had made draped over my reading chair, the family photos in simple frames on the mantel. "Your home has character," she said, in a tone that made the word character sound like a polite substitute for outdated. "Thomas tells me you've lived here your entire married life?" "Yes," I replied warmly, trying to bridge the gap I already felt forming between us. "Harold and I bought it when we were just starting out. He renovated much of it himself over the years." Vanessa smiled tightly. "How quaint. That DIY approach is actually coming back into fashion in certain circles. Though Thomas and I have been looking at properties in Lakeview Estates. Have you seen the new development? The amenities are absolutely divine." I knew Lakeview Estates well. It was the most exclusive neighborhood in our region, with homes starting at prices that made my nurse's salary seem like pocket change. The implications were clear. Thomas was being absorbed into Vanessa's world, one of privilege and connections that operated at a different altitude than my modest life on Sycamore Lane. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I was happy for Thomas, but privately concerned about the differences in backgrounds and expectations. Still, I embraced Vanessa and tried my best to be involved in the wedding planning. I soon discovered, however, that my involvement would be strictly limited. "Eleanor," said Catherine Harrington, Vanessa's mother, during our first planning meeting. She was a slim, elegant woman who wore her silver-streaked hair in a sleek chignon and seemed incapable of creasing her linen clothing. "We've already reserved the Lakeview Country Club and engaged the top wedding planner in New England. There's no need for you to concern yourself with any of the arrangements." I felt immediately sidelined, but reminded myself that this was about Thomas and Vanessa, not me. "I'd be happy to host the rehearsal dinner," I offered, thinking of the lovely local Italian restaurant where Harold and I had celebrated our anniversaries. "Oh." Catherine exchanged a knowing glance with Vanessa. "We've actually already booked Le Chateau for the rehearsal dinner. Lawrence has connections with the owner." Lawrence was Vanessa's father, a man who seemed to have connections with everyone who mattered in a 3-state radius. "I see," I said quietly. "Is there anything I can help with?" Vanessa patted my hand as if I were a child. "We know you want to contribute, Eleanor. Perhaps you could help with assembling the welcome bags for out-of-town guests." I swallowed my pride and nodded. After all, wasn't a mother supposed to support her child's happiness, even when it stung to be relegated to the most menial of tasks? Wedding was extravagant beyond anything our family had ever experienced. 6 bridesmaids in designer gowns, a renowned string quartet for the ceremony, flower arrangements that must have depleted several greenhouses. I felt distinctly out of place in my carefully chosen dress from the department store, which suddenly seemed woefully inadequate among the Harringtons' social circle. Thomas spent most of the reception with Vanessa's family and their friends, stopping by my table only briefly to check in. "Are you having a good time, Mom?" he asked, his bow tie slightly askew after hours of dancing. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything is beautiful. I'm so happy for you." He smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Vanessa's father is talking about bringing me into the partnership. Track early. Says I have the right instincts for the high-end clients they're pursuing." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it despite the nagging feeling that Thomas was being pulled further into the Harringtons' orbit and further from his roots, and from me. After the honeymoon, Thomas and Vanessa began house hunting in earnest. They invited me along one weekend to see a property in Lakeview Estates, a sprawling colonial with 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen with double islands, and a landscaped backyard complete with a pool and pool house. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Thomas asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "The master suite has a morning bar and a steam shower, and there's a whole wing that would be perfect for when we start a family." It was stunning, certainly, but I couldn't help wondering how they could possibly afford it. Thomas had a good position at the firm, but he'd only been working for 3 years. I knew he still had student loans, modest as they were compared to many of his peers. "It's lovely," I said. "But sweetheart, are you sure it's within your budget?" Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "My parents are helping with the down payment as a wedding gift. We've run the numbers, and with Thomas's trajectory at the firm, we can make it work." What I didn't know then was that making it work would soon involve me in ways I never anticipated or agreed to. About a month after they moved in, Thomas called. There was a strain in his voice I hadn't heard before. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a financial bind. The property taxes here are higher than we expected, and with the new furniture and Vanessa's car payment." "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation, my maternal instinct to protect overriding any fiscal caution. "6,000 would help us get caught up," he said, sounding relieved that I hadn't questioned him further. I withdrew the money from my savings the next day. It wasn't easy. I had been putting away a little each month toward eventual repairs on the Cape Cod, whose aging systems were beginning to show their wear. But Thomas needed me, and that's what mattered. This became a pattern over the next year. Every few months, Thomas would call with another temporary financial emergency. The pool needed resurfacing. Vanessa's position at the firm was being restructured, and she needed to invest in additional certifications. They had to replace the hardwood floors because Vanessa found them too rustic for her taste. Each time, I dipped further into my savings. Each time, Thomas promised it was just until they got back on their feet. Each time, the thank you notes and calls became briefer and less frequent. Then came the biggest request of all. Thomas appeared at my house one evening, alone. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with science projects, where we'd eaten countless meals together, where we'd planned his college applications. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," he began, fidgeting with his wedding band. "Vanessa and I are struggling with the mortgage payments. The interest rate adjusted higher than we expected, and with everything else." My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "How much are you behind?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. 2 months. But it's not just that. The payment is just too high for us right now. Vanessa's father had some business setbacks, so they can't help anymore." I took a deep breath. "What are you asking, Thomas?" "If you could help with the mortgage for a while, just until I make senior associate, or until Vanessa finds a better position. We don't want to lose the house, Mom. It's our dream home." Their dream home. The words echoed in my mind as I thought about the modest Cape Cod that had been Harold's in my dream, the home Thomas had so readily suggested I sell after his father died. Still, I agreed. I couldn't bear the thought of my son and his wife facing foreclosure, dealing with the stress and embarrassment that would follow. I had spent my life easing Thomas's troubles. I couldn't stop now. "I'll need to talk to Dr. Montgomery about taking on some weekend shifts," I said. At 65, the long hours were becoming increasingly taxing on my body, but I would manage. Thomas's relief was palpable. "You're the best, Mom. It's just temporary, I promise. Once things stabilize at the firm, I'll be able to take care of everything." That night, after he left, I sat alone at my kitchen table and calculated what this commitment would mean financially. The mortgage payment on their Lakeview Estates home was nearly 3 times what I paid for my own house. To cover it, I would need to postpone my retirement indefinitely and drastically cut back on my already modest expenses. But what choice did I have? He was my son, my only child, my last connection to Harold. The next day, I spoke with Dr. Montgomery about taking on additional responsibilities at the hospital. "Eleanor," he said, concern evident in his kind eyes, "you're already working more hours than someone your age should. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I'm just trying to build up my retirement fund a bit more." He didn't look convinced, but respected me too much to pry. I can assign you to the weekend administrative role. The hours are steadier than floor duty, but it means giving up your weekends. Are you sure about this? I'm sure, I said, though in my heart I knew this path would lead to sacrifices I hadn't fully reckoned with yet. For the next 3 years, I paid Thomas and Vanessa's mortgage without complaint. Each month, I transferred $3,175 directly to their account, often forgoing my own needs to make it happen. I postponed needed repairs on my Cape Cod, let my car go longer between service appointments than was advisable, and declined invitations from colleagues if they involved spending money. During this time, my relationship with Thomas and Vanessa gradually shifted. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. The phone calls grew shorter, the excuses more frequent. Vanessa rarely asked about my life anymore, and when I visited their home, I couldn't help but notice how they'd continued to renovate and redecorate lavishly while I was pinching pennies to keep them afloat. "The new sectional is gorgeous," I commented during one visit, eyeing what must have been an extremely expensive piece of furniture. "Is it from that designer showroom? In Hartford?" "It's from a boutique in New York," Vanessa said casually. "We spent a weekend there last month. Thomas didn't mention it. We decided we deserved to splurge a little. Mental health is important, you know." I bit my tongue, thinking of the leaky faucet in my bathroom I couldn't afford to fix. That same evening, I overheard Vanessa on the phone with her mother while I was returning from the powder room. "I know, Mom. It's exhausting always having to include her in everything, but Thomas feels obligated, you know. At least she helps out financially, and she's good with the children when we need a break." My cheeks burned with humiliation. Helps out financially. I was paying their entire mortgage, sacrificing my retirement security to maintain their lifestyle in Lakeview Estates. And this was how she characterized my contribution, as if I were offering pocket change rather than the fruits of my labor at an age when most of my peers had long since retired. The real turning point came in early November of last year. I had been battling a persistent cough for weeks, pushing through my shifts despite feeling increasingly fatigued. Dr. Montgomery noticed me leaning against the nurse's station one evening, trying to catch my breath. "That's it, Eleanor," he said, firmly. "I'm ordering a chest X-ray right now." The diagnosis came back the next day: pneumonia with complications due to exhaustion and a weakened immune system. "You need rest," Dr. Montgomery insisted. "Complete rest. I'm writing you a prescription for antibiotics and putting you on medical leave for at least 4 weeks. I protested, thinking of the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, but he was adamant. "This isn't negotiable. Your health has to come first." For the first time in years, I had to consider my own needs. As I lay in my bed that evening, listening to the radiator's familiar ping as it heated my small home, I made a decision. I would call Thomas, explain the situation, and ask if they could handle their mortgage for a month or 2 while I recovered. When I phoned the next morning, Vanessa answered. "Eleanor," she said, her voice cool. "Thomas is in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "It's important, Vanessa. I need to speak with him about the mortgage payment." There was a pause. "The mortgage payment? What about it?" "I'm on medical leave. Pneumonia. I won't be able to work extra shifts for a while. So, I was hoping you and Thomas could cover the mortgage until I'm back on my feet." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Vanessa, did you hear me?" "I'm ill." "I heard you," she said, her voice suddenly hard. "So, you're saying you won't be sending the money this month?" The way she phrased it, like it was an obligation, not a sacrifice I'd been making, stung deeply. "I can't, Vanessa. I'm ill, and the doctor says I need complete rest." "We're counting on that money, Eleanor," she cut in. "We have plans. We've already booked our annual ski trip to Vermont over the Christmas break." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. They had money for a ski vacation, but not for their own mortgage. "I've been covering your mortgage for 3 years," I said quietly. I think you and Thomas can manage for a month while I recover from pneumonia. Her laugh was short and dismissive. Right. Because that makes up for everything Thomas did for you after his father died. What? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. He told me how you leaned on him completely after Harold died. How he had to be your emotional support when he was barely 22. How he stayed in Connecticut for his first job. Because you couldn't handle being alone. Each word felt like a slap. That wasn't what happened at all. I had held myself together for Thomas's sake, worked extra shifts to keep him in college, encouraged him to follow his dreams. That's not true, Vanessa. Look, she said with exaggerated patience, we all know you've been helping with the mortgage, because you want to be involved in our lives. And that's fine, but don't try to use your health as leverage. I was speechless. In what universe was paying someone's mortgage considered wanting to be involved? I'll talk to Thomas tonight. I finally managed to say, please have him call me. But Thomas didn't call that night or the next. When he finally reached out 3 days later, he sounded rushed and defensive. Mom, Vanessa told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but we really need that payment. We've committed to hosting a pre-Christmas dinner for Vanessa's work colleagues, and we've already ordered new dining room furniture. Thomas, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest that had nothing to do with pneumonia. I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years. 3 years of extra shifts, of skipping meals, of putting off repairs on my own home. I'm asking for a short break while I recover from a serious illness. There was silence on the other end, then, so you're keeping track? I thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return. His words hit me like a physical blow. How had we gotten here? When had my son become someone who could speak to me this way? I don't expect anything in return except basic respect, I said, my voice breaking. And perhaps some concern for my health? Of course I'm concerned, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. It's just bad timing. The holidays are coming up and we have obligations. Obligations more important than your mother's health? I asked. He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. Let's not be dramatic, Mom. Look, I'll see what we can do. Maybe we can send you half this month. Half? After everything, he was offering half. Don't bother, I said, a strange calm settling over me. I'll figure something out. After we hung up, I sat in my silent house, truly seeing my situation for the first time. I had given everything to a son who viewed my sacrifices as obligations. I had emptied my savings to maintain his lifestyle while neglecting my own needs. I had worked myself into illness for people who planned ski vacations while I couldn't afford to fix my leaky faucet. Something fundamental had to change, and it had to start with me. The next day, despite still feeling weak, I made 2 important calls. The first was to my bank to stop the automatic transfer to Thomas and Vanessa's account. The second was to my old friend Grace Thompson, a retired nurse who had been trying to get me to join her volunteer group at the community center for years. Eleanor Prescott, she said warmly when she picked up. To what do I owe this pleasure? I was wondering if that offer to join your knitting circle is still open, I said, surprising myself with how light my voice sounded. Always. We meet on Thursdays at the senior center. But aren't you usually working then? Not anymore, I said. I'm making some changes. As I recovered from pneumonia over the next 2 weeks, I received multiple texts and calls from Thomas, each more urgent than the last. Where was the mortgage payment? Had I forgotten to transfer the money? Was there a problem with the bank? I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on getting well and reconsidering my priorities. I started reading books that had been sitting on my nightstand for years. I invited Grace over for tea. I even called my sister Margaret in Rhode Island, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because I'd been too busy working extra shifts. The day before Thanksgiving, Thomas finally showed up at my door. He looked harried, his normally meticulous appearance disheveled, his eyes shadowed with stress. "Mom," he said as soon as I opened the door. "There's been some mistake with the mortgage payment. The bank says the transfer was canceled." I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he barely glanced at me, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't comment on my still evident weight loss from being ill. "It wasn't a mistake, Thomas," I said calmly as we sat in my living room. "I canceled the transfer intentionally." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because I'm no longer able to pay your mortgage. I'm focusing on my health and my future now." His face flushed with anger. "You can't just decide that without warning. We have commitments based on that money." "Like your ski trip?" I asked quietly. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. "That's not fair. We work hard and we deserve a vacation. And I deserve to retire someday. I deserve to live without working myself into exhaustion. I deserve to be treated with respect by my son and daughter-in-law." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been there for me. And I always will be, emotionally. But financially, you and Vanessa need to stand on your own 2 feet now." He stood up abruptly. "Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives to include you when you're being this selfish." Selfish? The word hung in the air between us. "Thanksgiving is tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "Will I see you and Vanessa?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to the Harringtons. Vanessa's mom is expecting us." "I see. And Christmas?" "About that," he said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "Vanessa's parents are hosting at their estate this year. It's going to be mostly their crowd, their family friends. Vanessa thinks, we both think, it might be awkward. For you." And there it was. After everything I had sacrificed, after years of putting their needs before my own, I wasn't even welcome at their Christmas table. "Awkward," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "It's nothing personal," Thomas said, already backing toward the door. "It's just a different crowd, you know. You probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway." But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. I hope you have a lovely holiday." After he left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, watching the spot where his car had been parked. 42 years of motherhood, of putting him first. And this was where we had landed, a place where I was considered selfish for not working myself to death to pay for his lifestyle, where I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because I didn't fit in with my own son's new life. That evening, I received a text from Vanessa. "Thomas told me about your decision. Very disappointed. Thought you cared about our family. Guess we know where we stand now." I didn't respond. Instead, I made another decision, one that would change everything. The next morning, rather than spending Thanksgiving alone feeling sorry for myself, I drove to the community center where Grace had organized a holiday meal for seniors who had nowhere else to go. I hadn't told her I was coming, and her face lit up with genuine delight when she saw me walk in. "Eleanor, I didn't expect to see you today," she said, embracing me warmly. "I had a change of plans," I said simply. She didn't pry, just handed me an apron. "Well, we're thrilled to have you. The sweet potatoes need attention." For the first time in years, I enjoyed a holiday meal without tension, without walking on eggshells, without carefully monitoring my words to avoid offending Vanessa or her parents. The seniors at the community center were grateful for the company, the food, and the simple kindness of being remembered on a holiday. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. And with that peace came clarity about what I needed to do next. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I made an appointment with the lawyer who had helped me with Harold's estate years ago. Martin Goldstein's office was exactly as I remembered it. Bookshelves lining the walls, the scent of coffee perpetually in the air, and a sense of calm competence that had comforted me during those dark days after losing my husband. "Eleanor," Martin said warmly, rising from behind his desk to greet me. "It's been too long. How can I help you today?" I settled into the chair across from him, smoothing my skirt nervously. "I need some legal advice about a financial situation with my son." Martin nodded, his expression turning professional. "Tell me what's going on." I explained everything. How I'd been paying Thomas and Vanessa's mortgage for 3 years, the recent conflict over my illness, and their exclusion of me from the holidays. As I spoke, Martin took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. "Let me make sure I understand correctly. You've been making direct payments to their mortgage lender, but there's no formal loan agreement between you and your son?" "That's right. It was just a verbal understanding that they would pay me back someday when they were more financially stable." "And approximately how much have you paid toward their mortgage over these 3 years?" I had calculated this number precisely the night before. $139,500. Martin's eyebrows shot up. "That's a substantial sum, Eleanor. And you mentioned you withdrew from your retirement savings to cover some of these payments?" I nodded, feeling a flush of shame. "I also picked up extra shifts at the hospital, but it wasn't enough. I've depleted almost all of my non-pension savings." "I see." He leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "From a legal standpoint, without a written agreement, this money could be considered a gift rather than a loan. However, we could argue that there was an implied contract based on the pattern of payments and the verbal understanding." "What are my options?" I asked. "Well, you could sue for repayment, though that would be a lengthy and potentially expensive process, not to mention the strain it would put on your relationship with Thomas." He paused. "Or you could simply stop the payments as you've already done and let them handle the consequences." The thought of suing my own son made my stomach clench. "I don't want to take legal action against Thomas. I just want to protect what I have left for my own future." Martin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then I recommend documenting everything. Every payment you've made, any text messages or emails discussing these payments, and the circumstances surrounding them. Keep this documentation in case they try to make any claims against you in the future." "Do you think they would do that?" "I hope not. But in my experience, money can bring out the worst in people, even family." He hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing to consider, Eleanor. If they default on their mortgage and the property goes into foreclosure, it could affect you if your name is on any of the loan documents." My heart skipped a beat. My name isn't on their mortgage, but I did co-sign on a home equity line of credit they took out last year. Vanessa said they needed it for home improvements. Martin's expression grew concerned. "In that case, if they default on that loan, the lender could come after you for payment. How much was the line of credit?" $75,000, I said quietly. He sighed. "I strongly recommend you check the status of that account immediately. If they've drawn on that credit line, you may want to consider paying it off directly to protect your own credit and financial security." I left Martin's office with a clear action plan, but a heavy heart. The reality of my financial vulnerability was sobering. I had spent years giving everything to my son, and now I needed to focus on protecting myself from further damage. My first stop was the bank where Thomas and Vanessa had opened the home equity line of credit. After verifying my identity as a co-signer, the bank representative pulled up the account information. "The current balance on the HELOC is $68,475, she said, turning the screen slightly so I could see. My mouth went dry. They had used almost the entire credit line. "When was the last transaction?" I asked. The representative clicked through a few screens. "There was a withdrawal of $15,000 on November 10th. just before Thanksgiving. Just before they booked their ski vacation and told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. "I'd like to pay off this balance and close the account," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The representative looked surprised. "The entire balance? That's a significant amount." "I understand. I'll be transferring the funds from my retirement account." It took nearly 2 hours to complete all the paperwork, including the early withdrawal from my retirement fund. The penalties were substantial, but Martin had made it clear that the alternative, remaining financially entangled with Thomas and Vanessa, could be far more costly in the long run. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. I had just sacrificed almost all of my remaining retirement savings to protect myself from my own son's financial decisions. The pain of that reality was so profound, it had circled around to numbness. At home, I found 3 missed calls from Thomas and a text message that read, "Need to discuss mortgage situation ASAP? Call me." I set my phone aside without responding. I needed time to process everything before engaging with him again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad, taking stock of my financial situation. After paying off the HELOC, I had approximately $28,000 left in accessible savings, barely enough for a year of minimal expenses if I stopped working entirely. My pension from the hospital would start at 67, providing a modest but dependable income. The equity in my house was substantial, but I had hoped to leave that to Thomas someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I had been saving for a future where I could help my son even after I was gone. Now I was facing the possibility of selling my home just to support myself in retirement. My phone rang again. Thomas. This time I answered. "Mom, finally," he said, sounding irritated. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I had appointments," I replied simply. "Well, we need to talk about this mortgage situation. The payment was due yesterday and we got a late notice from the bank." "Yes, I imagine you did." There was a pause as if he was taken aback by my calm tone. "So, are you going to send the payment or not? Because if this goes on our credit report—" "I won't be making any more payments on your mortgage, Thomas," I interrupted. "As I told you last week, I'm focusing on my own financial security now." "Mom, you can't just—" He stopped. Then his voice took on a wheedling tone I recognized from his teenage years when he wanted something expensive. "Look, I know you're upset about Christmas, but that's Vanessa's family's tradition. It's not like we're excluding you deliberately." "Except that is exactly what you're doing," I said quietly. "Vanessa specifically told me I wouldn't fit in with the crowd at her parents' house." "She didn't mean it like that," he protested. "It's just that her family does things differently. More formally than the woman who raised you, who worked 60-hour weeks to put you through college, who has been paying your mortgage for 3 years. That woman isn't formal enough to sit at a Christmas table with your wife's family." The silence on the other end told me he had no good answer. "Thomas," I continued, my voice softening, "I love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But this relationship has become unhealthy. You and Vanessa need to take responsibility for your own finances, and I need to prepare for my retirement. But the mortgage is your responsibility, not mine. I've already made sacrifices you don't even know about to protect myself financially. I paid off the home equity line of credit today." "You what?" His voice rose in pitch. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was a cosigner, and I couldn't risk my credit being damaged if you and Vanessa defaulted. We weren't going to default. We just needed some flexibility until after the holidays." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Thomas, you withdrew $15,000 from that credit line 2 weeks ago. Was that for your ski vacation or the new dining room furniture?" He didn't respond immediately. And when he did, his voice was defensive. "We needed that furniture for entertaining. Vanessa's father's business associates are coming for dinner next month. It's important for my career advancement." "More important than your mother's financial security? More important than treating me with basic respect?" "That's not fair," he snapped. "You're twisting everything. We appreciate what you've done, but you can't hold it over our heads forever." The phrase, "what you've done," struck me as so inadequate. To describe the years of sacrifice, the depletion of my savings, the toll on my health. It wasn't what I'd done, it was what I'd given, at great personal cost. "I'm not holding anything over your head," I said. "I'm simply stating facts. I've supported you financially well into your adulthood, and now I'm stepping back. How you handle your finances going forward is up to you." "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm prioritizing my own needs after decades of prioritizing yours. It's called setting boundaries, Thomas." The conversation ended shortly after, with Thomas still upset but seemingly beginning to realize I wouldn't be swayed. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward, staring at the wall calendar where I'd circled Christmas Day with a red marker months ago, anticipating spending it with my son and his wife. The next morning, I received a text from Vanessa. "Thomas told me what you did. Paying off the HELOC without discussing it with us first was manipulative and controlling. We had plans for that money. This is exactly why we need space from you right now." I read the message twice, marveling at the mental gymnastics required to frame my paying off a debt I was legally responsible for as manipulative. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the hospital to speak with Dr. Montgomery about my return to work. The pneumonia had improved significantly, but I still tired easily and knew I couldn't handle the overnight shifts I'd been working to cover Thomas's mortgage. Dr. Montgomery welcomed me into his office, concern evident in his eyes. "Eleanor, you're looking better, but not fully recovered. Are you sure you're ready to come back?" "Not to my previous schedule," I admitted. "I was hoping we could discuss options for reduced hours." He nodded thoughtfully. "We could move you to administrative work for a while. 3 days a week, regular daytime hours. The pay would be less, but—" "That sounds perfect," I interrupted. "I've been reassessing my finances, and I've decided it's time to start my transition toward retirement." He studied me for a moment. "May I speak frankly?" "Of course. I've been concerned about you for some time, Eleanor. The hours you've been working aren't sustainable for someone your age, regardless of how dedicated you are." He hesitated. "And I've observed that your son rarely visits you here, even when you've worked holidays or overnight shifts." I felt a flush of embarrassment. Was my situation so obvious to others? "Thomas has his own life," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Dr. Montgomery's gaze was gentle but penetrating. "We've worked together for what, 15 years now? In all that time, I've never seen someone give so much and ask for so little in return." I didn't know how to respond, uncomfortable with both the praise and the implicit criticism of my son. "The administrative position starts next week if you're interested," he continued, changing the subject. "Take the rest of this week to rest and recover fully." I thanked him and was about to leave when he added, "Oh, and Eleanor, the hospital's annual Christmas party is on the 23rd. I hope you'll join us this year since I recall you usually work that evening." The kindness in his invitation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'd like that," I managed to say before leaving his office. The next 2 weeks passed in relative calm. I adjusted to my new schedule at the hospital, finding the administrative work less physically taxing but intellectually engaging. I started attending Grace's knitting circle at the senior center and even volunteered one weekend, helping to organize a clothing drive for families affected by a recent apartment fire. Thomas called twice more about the mortgage, each conversation becoming increasingly tense as the reality of their financial situation was setting in, and neither he nor Vanessa seemed prepared to make the necessary lifestyle adjustments. "We might have to sell the house," he said during our last call, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "That might be the most sensible option," I replied calmly. "You could find something more within your means." "This is our home," he protested. "We've put so much into it, and what would Vanessa's family think?" I bit back the observation that their concern with appearances had contributed significantly to their current predicament. "Thomas, there are worse things than downsizing to a home you can actually afford." "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "You've lived in the same house for 30 years. "Yes, a house your father and I could afford on our combined salaries with careful budgeting and modest expectations." The conversation ended with him declaring, "We'll figure it out ourselves," as if that hadn't been exactly what I was suggesting all along. I didn't hear from either of them for several days after that, which gave me time to focus on my own healing, both physical and emotional. The distance helped me see the pattern of our relationship more clearly. For years, I had been enabling Thomas and Vanessa's financial irresponsibility, all while being slowly edged out of their lives, except when they needed money. Then, a week before Christmas, the doorbell rang. It was early evening, and I hadn't been expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Lawrence Harrington, Vanessa's father, standing on my porch. In all the years Thomas had been married to Vanessa, Lawrence had barely spoken more than a few sentences to me. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege and power. "Mrs. Prescott," he nodded stiffly. "May I come in? There's a matter we need to discuss." I stepped aside to let him enter, noting the cashmere overcoat and leather gloves he removed as he stepped into my modest living room. "Can I offer you some tea or coffee?" I asked, falling back on basic hospitality despite my wariness. "No, thank you. This won't take long." He remained standing, eyeing my furniture with the same barely concealed judgment his daughter had shown during her first visit years ago. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrington?" He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a posture reminiscent of a principal about to discipline a student. "I understand you've decided to withdraw your financial support from Thomas and Vanessa's household." The way he phrased it made it sound like I was abandoning dependents rather than expecting grown adults to pay their own bills. "I've decided to focus on my own financial security," I corrected gently. "Thomas and Vanessa are both employed adults fully capable of managing their own finances." Lawrence's mouth tightened. "Be that as it may, your decision has created significant hardship for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate with the holidays approaching and various social obligations to fulfill." I waited, sensing he was working his way to his actual point. "Vanessa is quite distressed," he continued. "She tells me you've not only stopped contributing to their mortgage but also paid off and closed a line of credit they were relying on." "Line of credit for which I was legally responsible as a co-signer," I pointed out. "I was protecting myself from potential liability." He waved a dismissive hand. "Legally, perhaps you were within your rights, but surely you understand the position. This puts them in socially. They've committed to hosting events, made plans based on certain financial expectations. Expectations that I would continue to work 60-hour weeks at age 67 to fund their lifestyle?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the indignation rising within me. Lawrence had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "No one expected you to work yourself ill, Mrs. Prescott. But a more gradual transition with proper notice would have been the considerate approach." "I gave notice when I was diagnosed with pneumonia," I said. I explained that I couldn't maintain the extra shifts necessary to cover their mortgage. Thomas and Vanessa chose to prioritize a ski vacation and new furniture over their own housing. "Security," he frowned. "That's Vanessa's version." "It's the truth," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. "I have the bank statements and text messages to prove it." Lawrence shifted his weight, clearly unused to being challenged. "Regardless of the details, the situation is causing considerable stress to my daughter, and by extension, my wife and myself. We're hosting Christmas at our home with several prominent families attending. The last thing we need is for Thomas and Vanessa to be distracted by financial worries." And there it was, the real concern. Not my son and daughter-in-law's financial stability, but how their stress might affect the Harringtons' holiday entertainment. "What exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Harrington?" I said, though I already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting a compromise," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "If you could resume the mortgage payments temporarily, just until after the new year, it would give them time to make arrangements. Perhaps downsize, as you suggested to Thomas." "And why would I do that when I've already made it clear I need to prioritize my own financial security?" Lawrence reached inside his coat and withdrew a checkbook. "I'm prepared to offer you compensation for this inconvenience." The implied insult, that my financial decisions were merely an inconvenience to their social calendar, was breathtaking in its callousness. "You want to pay me to resume paying my son's mortgage?" I clarified, wanting to be absolutely certain. I understood this stunning proposition. "Think of it as a consulting fee," he said smoothly, uncapping an expensive-looking pen. "You temporarily resume the payments, allowing them to maintain appearances through the holiday season, and I compensate you for your trouble. Simple business arrangement." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. This man, this wealthy, privileged man who had never once invited me to his home despite years of family connection, was standing in my living room offering to essentially bribe me to continue enabling my son's financial dependence. "Mr. Harrington," I said finally, my voice quiet, but firm, "I'm not interested in being paid to support my own son. If you're concerned about Thomas and Vanessa's financial situation, perhaps you should offer to help them directly." He looked genuinely surprised, as if the concept of directly supporting his own daughter had never occurred to him. "That's not how we do things in our family. We believe in financial independence." The irony was so rich I almost laughed. Financial independence facilitated by a 67-year-old nurse working overtime to pay bills for two healthy adults in their 30s. His face hardened. "I see Vanessa was right about your attitude. This is precisely why we felt it would be awkward to include you in our Christmas gathering." "Because I expect adults to pay their own bills? Because you clearly harbor resentment toward my daughter and her lifestyle choices." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would accomplish nothing. "Mr. Harrington, I don't resent Vanessa or her choices. I simply can no longer subsidize them at the expense of my own health and financial security." He replaced his checkbook in his pocket with a sharp motion. "Very well. I can see this conversation isn't going to be productive. I'll tell Thomas and Vanessa they'll need to make other arrangements." "That would be best," I agreed. As he moved toward the door, he paused, turning back with a calculating expression. "You know, Eleanor? May I call you Eleanor? Many parents would be grateful that their child had married into a family of our standing. The connections alone are invaluable." I met his gaze steadily. "Many parents would expect their daughter-in-law's family to treat them with basic courtesy and respect, regardless of standing." His lips thinned, but he offered no response as he donned his coat and gloves. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Prescott," he said as I opened the door for him. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Harrington," I replied, watching as he strode to his luxury sedan without a backward glance. After closing the door, I leaned against it, my heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. The entire interaction had been surreal, from Lawrence Harrington's unexpected appearance on my doorstep to his brazen attempt to buy my continued financial support of Thomas and Vanessa. More disturbing was the realization that this was how they all viewed me, as a resource to be utilized, an inconvenience when I failed to fulfill my designated role, a social embarrassment to be managed and excluded. Not as a person with my own needs, feelings, and dignity. I moved to my kitchen and put the kettle on, needing the comfort of a hot cup of tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I glanced at the calendar again, at that circled Christmas day that now loomed as a day of solitude rather than family connection. For a moment, I felt a wave of doubt. Had I done the right thing? Should I have found a way to compromise, to ease Thomas and Vanessa into financial independence more gradually? Was I punishing them for excluding me from Christmas by withdrawing financial support? The kettle whistled, interrupting my spiral of self-doubt. As I prepared my tea, I reminded myself of the facts. I had worked myself into pneumonia trying to support my son's lifestyle. I had depleted my savings and put my own retirement at risk. I had been explicitly told I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because I wouldn't fit in with the Harringtons' social circle. No, I wasn't punishing Thomas and Vanessa. I was finally recognizing that I deserved better treatment than I had been receiving. I was establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Thomas's number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom," he began without preamble, his voice tight with anger. "Did you just refuse money from Lawrence Harrington?" So Lawrence had wasted no time reporting our conversation. "I refused to be paid to resume paying your mortgage." "Yes." "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for us? For Vanessa's father to have to come to you like that?" I closed my eyes, absorbing the fact that my son saw his father-in-law attempting to bribe me as somehow humiliating for them, not for me. "Thomas," I said quietly, "if you're embarrassed, it should be by the fact that your father-in-law felt he needed to intervene in your financial affairs, not by my refusal to accept payment for continuing to support you." "He was trying to help," Thomas protested, "and you threw it back in his face. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to Vanessa's relationship with her parents? They're furious. They're furious that I won't continue to work myself ill to pay your bills," I clarified. "That seems like misplaced anger, don't you think?" "This isn't just about money anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "This is about you deliberately trying to ruin our holidays, our standing with Vanessa's family, everything." The accusation stung all the more because I could hear in his voice that he genuinely believed it. In his mind, my decision to prioritize my own well-being was a deliberate attack on him and Vanessa. "Thomas, I love you," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I think you need to take a step back and consider how you would feel if our situations were reversed. If I expected you to work extra hours to pay my bills, then excluded you from family gatherings because you wouldn't fit in. That's different," he muttered. "Parents are supposed to help their children. Adult children are supposed to become independent," I countered gently, "and to treat their parents with respect and gratitude, not as ATMs they can access whenever they want." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a coldness I'd never heard from him before, Thomas said, "You know what? Fine. Keep your money. Stay home alone for Christmas. I hope it's worth it." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table, the tea cooling in front of me, and let the tears come. Not just for the immediate pain of Thomas's anger and rejection, but for all the years I'd spent believing that my sacrifices would someday be recognized and appreciated. For the gradual erosion of our relationship as Thomas and Vanessa became more focused on appearances and status than on genuine connection. For the mother I'd been, who had failed to teach her son the value of gratitude and respect. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes but a clearer mind. I couldn't control Thomas and Vanessa's reactions or choices. I could only control my own. I called Grace and asked if the offer to join her family for Christmas dinner was still open. "Of course," she exclaimed. "We'd love to have you, and don't worry about bringing anything fancy, just your wonderful self." Then I called Dr. Montgomery's office to confirm I would attend the hospital Christmas party on the 23rd. His secretary sounded pleased. "Dr. Montgomery will be delighted. He specifically asked me to make sure you were coming." Finally, I called my sister Margaret in Rhode Island. We hadn't been close in recent years, partly due to distance and partly due to the time constraints of my work schedule. "Eleanor," she said warmly when she answered. "What a lovely surprise." We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. When I told her in broad strokes about the situation with Thomas and Vanessa, she was supportive without being judgmental. "It sounds like you're finally taking care of yourself," she said. "It's about time, if you ask me. You've always been the one to give until there's nothing left." "I just never thought it would come to this," I admitted. "Being excluded from Christmas, having my son angry at me for not paying his bills. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is letting our children face the consequences of their own choices," Margaret said wisely. "You taught Thomas how to walk by eventually letting go of his hands, right? This is just the adult version of that." Her perspective was comforting, a reminder that stepping back wasn't abandonment, but rather a necessary part of parenting an adult child. "You know," Margaret added before we hung up, "I was planning to visit Cousin Sarah in Boston after New Year's. That's not too far from you. Maybe I could extend my trip and spend a few days with you." The prospect of seeing my sister, of reconnecting with family who valued my company, lifted my spirits considerably. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking about the changes I'd made and those still to come. For the first time in years, I wasn't arranging my life around Thomas's needs and preferences. I was making plans based on my own wishes, connecting with people who reciprocated my affection, setting boundaries that protected my well-being. It wasn't the life I had envisioned when Thomas was growing up, when I imagined us always being close, always being central to each other's lives, but it was a life I could embrace with dignity and self-respect. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more accusations, more painful realizations about how much my relationship with my son had changed. But I was no longer willing to purchase his presence in my life at the cost of my own health and financial security. As I looked at that circled Christmas Day on my calendar, I decided to erase the red circle and write instead, "Dinner at Grace's, 2 p.m. Not the family holiday I had planned, but perhaps the beginning of a new tradition, one built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation and financial dependence. And that, I realized with a sense of bittersweet peace, would have to be enough. The hospital Christmas party was more elegant than I had expected. The administration had transformed the usually sterile conference room into a winter wonderland with twinkling lights, silver and blue decorations, and tables adorned with centerpieces of white poinsettias and pine branches. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and servers circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. I had debated what to wear, eventually settling on a simple burgundy dress I'd purchased years ago for a fundraiser Harold and I had attended. It still fit well enough, though I'd added a silver scarf to update it and hide the slightly dated neckline. As I stood somewhat awkwardly near the entrance, Dr. Montgomery spotted me and made his way through the crowd. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "you look lovely. I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you, Samuel," I replied, using his first name as he'd often asked me to do outside of work hours. "Everything looks beautiful." He offered me his arm. "Let me introduce you to some people. Most of the administrative staff only know you by reputation." I raised an eyebrow. "Reputation?" He smiled. "As the most competent nurse in the pediatric unit, and the only person who can decipher my handwriting." For the next hour, Samuel guided me through the party, introducing me to board members, administrative personnel, and physicians from other departments. To my surprise, many of them greeted me by name, mentioning specific instances where my work had impressed them or helped their patients. "Dr. Patel still talks about how you recognized the signs of a rare complication in that transplant patient last year," the chief of surgery told me. "Said it probably saved the patient's life." I blushed, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "I was just doing my job." "With exceptional skill," Samuel added firmly. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing, even enjoying the respite from my personal concerns. Samuel was an attentive companion, making sure my glass was refilled and finding us a table. When dinner was served, "You seem different tonight," he observed as we enjoyed our meal. "Different how?" He considered for a moment. "More present somehow. Usually, when I see you at work functions, you seem distracted, as if you're mentally calculating how soon you can politely leave to get back to your responsibilities." I couldn't deny the accuracy of his observation. For years, I had treated hospital events as obligations to be endured rather than enjoyed, always aware of the ticking clock of my commitments to Thomas. "I suppose I am more present," I acknowledged. "I've made some changes recently, trying to focus more on myself." "It suits you," he said simply. After dessert was served, the hospital CEO gave a brief speech thanking everyone for their dedication throughout the year. As he concluded, he announced that there would be small gifts for each attendee arranged alphabetically on tables near the exit. When the formal portion of the evening ended, Samuel and I made our way to the gift table. The package with my name was elegantly wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. "Open it," Samuel encouraged. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover, along with a gift card to a local spa. "This is for everyone?" I asked, surprised by the personal touch. Samuel smiled slightly. "The spa gift cards are standard. The journals were my idea, but I may have taken special care with yours." I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the champagne I'd been sipping. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful. I remember you once mentioned that you used to keep a journal before life got too busy. I thought perhaps now might be a good time to resume the practice." The fact that he had remembered such a casual comment made years ago during a quiet night shift touched me deeply. As the party wound down, Samuel offered to walk me to my car. The December night was cold but clear, with stars visible despite the city lights. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said as we crossed the parking lot. "There's a chamber music concert at the university next weekend. Would you be interested in attending with me?" I stopped walking, taken by surprise. "Are you asking me on a date, Samuel?" He looked slightly embarrassed, but met my eyes directly. "I suppose I am. Is that inappropriate?" "It's not inappropriate," I interrupted gently. "It's just unexpected. I've always admired you, Eleanor. Your competence, your compassion, your quiet strength. I should have asked you years ago, but you always seemed so unavailable, not just in terms of time, but emotionally as well." I thought about how I had structured my entire life around Thomas's needs and wants, leaving little room for personal connections or relationships. How many opportunities for friendship, for companionship, for joy had I missed in those years of single-minded devotion? "The concert sounds lovely," I said. "I'd be happy to join you." His smile lit up his face, making him appear years younger. "Wonderful. I'll pick you up at 7 if that works." We confirmed the details, and as he opened my car door for me, he hesitated, then leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Samuel." As I drove home, my cheek still tingling from the unexpected kiss, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years, the fluttering excitement of possibility. At 67, I had assumed that the romantic chapter of my life was closed, that my role had narrowed to mother, nurse, caregiver. The idea that I might still have experiences ahead of me, concerts, dates, connections, was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. When I arrived home, I noticed lights on in my neighbor's house across the street. Judith Walsh had lived there for as long as I had been in my home, but our interactions had been limited to waves and occasional brief chats about the weather or neighborhood happenings. Like so many of my potential friendships, I had never cultivated a deeper connection, always rushing back to my responsibilities. On impulse, I crossed the street and knocked on her door. Judith answered, surprise evident on her face. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I was just wondering, The Christmas lights on your house look so beautiful every year. I've always meant to ask if you'd help. Me put some up on mine. If you have time, of course. Judith's face lit up. I'd love to. Richard always handled our exterior decorations, but after he passed, I taught myself. It's become a bit of a passion now. She glanced at her watch. It's not too late if you want to at least make a plan tonight. I have hot cocoa. An hour later, Judith and I sat at her kitchen table with empty mugs and a sketch of how we would decorate my house the following weekend. What had started as a conversation about Christmas lights had evolved into shared stories about our late husbands, our experiences in the neighborhood, and our common interest in gardening. We should start a small garden club when spring comes, Judith suggested enthusiastically. There are at least 4 other neighbors I know who would join. I'd like that, I said, realizing I meant it. I've been thinking about redoing my backyard for years, but never seemed to find the time. Judith nodded understandingly. Life has a way of slipping past while we're busy with other things. After Richard died, I spent 2 years just going through the motions. Then one day I looked around and thought, this isn't living, this is just existing. That's when I started saying yes to things. The community choir, the library volunteer program, even online dating, though that was a disaster. She laughed, shaking her head at the memory. Online dating? I couldn't hide my surprise. Oh yes. Terrible experiences mostly, but a few nice dinners with interesting men. No real connections, but it got me out of the house. She studied me curiously. You've never thought about dating again? I shook my head. Between work and family obligations, it never seemed like an option. I paused. But actually, I just agreed to go to a concert next weekend with a colleague. A male colleague. Judith clapped her hands delightedly. Eleanor Prescott, is this a date? I think it might be, I admitted, feeling myself blush. Well, you must tell me all about it afterward. And if you need to borrow any accessories or want a second opinion on your outfit, I'm right across the street. As I walked back to my house later, I was struck by how easily a simple neighborly interaction had blossomed into what felt like the beginning of a genuine friendship. All because I had made the effort to reach out, to say yes instead of hurrying back to an empty house to worry about Thomas's problems. The next morning, I woke feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. I made coffee and took it to my back porch, despite the December chill, watching the winter birds at the feeder I maintained. The simple pleasure of the moment, the warm mug in my hands, the flitting chickadees, the pale winter sunshine, filled me with a contentment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or happiness. My phone chimed with a text message from Grace, confirming details for Christmas dinner at her home. I responded gratefully, then set the phone aside, determined not to let potential messages from Thomas or Vanessa intrude on my peaceful morning. Later that day, I visited a local nursery to purchase a small living Christmas tree for my front window. In past years, I had either gone to Thomas and Vanessa's for the holiday, or not bothered with decorations at all if I was working. This year would be different. As I was paying for the tree, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to find Peter, Chen, Thomas's childhood friend, approaching with a warm smile. Mrs. Prescott, it's been ages. He enveloped me in a friendly hug. Peter, what a lovely surprise. How are you? I'm well, thank you. And you? Thomas mentioned you're still working at Meadowbrook. Yes, though I've reduced my hours recently. Are you still in touch with Thomas? A slight shadow crossed Peter's open, friendly face. Not as much as I'd like. We grab lunch occasionally when I'm in town, but... He hesitated. But? I prompted gently. Peter shifted uncomfortably. To be honest, Mrs. Prescott, things changed after he married Vanessa. Our friendship just isn't the same. I've tried to maintain the connection, but it's difficult when... When what, Peter? I asked when he trailed off again. He sighed. when it feels like your value is measured by what you can do for them socially or professionally. I'm not in the same social circles as Vanessa's friends, and I work for a smaller architectural firm that can't offer Thomas the networking opportunities he seems focused on these days. I nodded, a familiar ache in my chest. I understand that. Feeling all too well. Peter's expression was sympathetic. I heard you won't be joining them for Christmas this year. News travels fast, I observed, wondering what version of the story Thomas had shared. Thomas mentioned it when I texted about getting together while I'm home. He said something about you having other plans this year. Peter paused, then added, quietly. He also mentioned you've stopped helping them financially. I felt a flicker of anger that Thomas was discussing our private financial matters with friends, but I kept my response neutral. Yes, I've needed to refocus on my own financial security. Good for you, Peter said with unexpected conviction. Thomas was my best friend growing up, and I'll always care about him, but… He took a deep breath. But the way he and Vanessa live, always stretching beyond their means, always chasing the next status symbol. It's not sustainable, and it's changed him. The validation from someone who had known Thomas since childhood was both comforting and painful. I keep hoping he'll realize that before it's too late, I said softly. Me too. Peter helped me carry the tree to my car. If you need any help setting this up, I'd be happy to stop by. My parents have your address. That's very kind of you, I said, touched by the offer. I should be able to manage, but I appreciate the thought. As we said goodbye, Peter surprised me with another hug. You know, Mrs. Prescott, Thomas was always lucky to have you as his mom. Some of us could see that, even if he's forgotten it. Temporarily, I hope. I drove home with the tree, Peter's words echoing in my mind. It was a powerful reminder that not everyone in Thomas's life viewed me through the same lens that he and Vanessa currently did, as an ATM, an obligation, an embarrassment. There were still people who recognized the value of the love and support I had provided all those years. With Judith's help the following day, I decorated my house for the first time in years. Nothing extravagant. White lights outlining the roof, and windows, a wreath on the door, the small living tree visible through the front window. But it transformed the place, making it feel festive and welcoming. We should have cocoa to celebrate, Judith declared when we finished. And you must tell me more about this doctor who's taking you to the concert. I laughed, feeling a girlish excitement that seemed decades younger than my actual age. There's not much to tell yet. Samuel is the chief of pediatrics at Meadowbrook. We've worked together for years, and he's only now asking you out? Men can be so slow, Judith teased. Is he handsome? He's distinguished, I said thoughtfully. He has kind eyes and a good smile. He's widowed, no children. A doctor with no children and kind eyes sounds promising. Judith wiggled her eyebrows, suggestively, making me laugh again. I haven't been on a date since before I met Harold, I confessed. I'm not even sure I remember how to behave. Just be yourself, Judith advised, patting my hand. That's always the best approach. And remember, he's probably just as nervous as you are. The day of the concert arrived, and I found myself spending an unusual amount of time on my appearance. I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a deep teal dress I had purchased years ago but never worn, tucked away for a special occasion that never seemed to materialize. I styled my hair more carefully than usual and even applied makeup, a practice I had largely abandoned except for the most formal occasions. When Samuel arrived precisely at 7, his appreciative gaze told me the effort had been worthwhile. You look beautiful, Eleanor, he said warmly. Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, with a tie that complemented my dress so well it might have been coordinated. The concert was held in the university's small recital hall, an intimate venue with excellent acoustics. The program featured a string quartet performing Dvorak and Brahms, music that filled the space with emotional richness. As the musicians played, I found myself fully immersed in the experience, not thinking about Thomas or Vanessa or financial concerns, just present in the beauty of the moment. During intermission, Samuel and I strolled in the university's art gallery adjacent to the recital hall. "Are you enjoying the performance?" he asked. "Very much," I replied sincerely. "It's been too long since I attended a live concert." "I confess I had ulterior motives in inviting you," Samuel said with a smile. "This quartet is performing a series of chamber music concerts throughout the year, and I was hoping to find someone who might want to attend them all with me." The implication that he was interested in more than just this evening, that he saw potential for an ongoing connection, sent a pleasant warmth through me. "I might be persuaded," I said, returning his smile. After the concert concluded, Samuel suggested dinner at a small Italian restaurant nearby. Over pasta and wine, our conversation flowed easily, moving from music to books, from hospital politics to travel dreams. "I've always wanted to see the Italian countryside," I admitted when he asked about places I hoped to visit. "Harold and I planned to go for our 35th anniversary, but then he got sick." Samuel nodded understandingly. "Catherine and I had similar plans for Greece. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to go alone. But lately, I've been thinking perhaps it's time." "What changed?" I asked. He considered the question thoughtfully. "I realized that by not going, I wasn't honoring her memory. I was freezing it in place, defining myself solely as a widower, rather than as someone still capable of experiencing joy and discovery." He looked at me directly. "What about you, Eleanor? What's changed recently? You mentioned at the Christmas party that you've been making some shifts in your life." I hesitated, unsure how much to share on a first date. But there was something about Samuel's open, non-judgmental expression that invited honesty. "I've been reassessing my priorities," I said carefully. "For many years, I centered my life around my son's needs and wants, often at the expense of my own well-being. Recently, I've had to acknowledge that this approach wasn't healthy for either of us." Samuel nodded encouragingly, but didn't press for details, allowing me to share only what I felt comfortable revealing. "I worked myself into pneumonia, trying to maintain a schedule that let me financially support my son and his wife," I continued. "When I got sick and asked for a temporary reprieve, their response made me realize that the relationship had become unbalanced and unhealthy." "That must have been painful," Samuel said quietly. "It was. It still is." I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "The hardest part has been accepting that the closeness I thought we had was conditional, dependent on my continued financial support. When I set boundaries, when I prioritized my own needs, everything changed." "Setting boundaries with adult children can be incredibly difficult," Samuel observed, "especially when you've been in caretaking mode for so long. Does it make me a bad mother?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing an insecurity I hadn't intended to express. Samuel's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. In fact, I'd argue it makes you a good mother, one who's modeling healthy self-care and appropriate boundaries for your son, even if he can't appreciate that lesson right now." His validation, offered without platitudes or dismissiveness, eased something tight in my chest. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, with the conversation moving to lighter topics. Samuel shared amusing hospital stories I'd never heard, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. When he drove me home later, he walked me to my door like a perfect gentleman. "I had a wonderful time, Eleanor," he said, standing close, enough that I could smell his subtle cologne. "So did I replied, suddenly feeling like a much younger woman on the doorstep after a successful first date. "I'd very much like to see you again," he said. "Perhaps dinner next weekend, unless that's too soon." "Not too soon at all," I assured him. He smiled, then leaned in slowly, giving me plenty of time to step back if I wished. Instead, I moved slightly, closer, and our lips met in a gentle, brief kiss that nevertheless sent a shiver of pleasure through me. "Good night, Eleanor," he said softly. "Good night, Samuel." I entered my house feeling both giddy and slightly disoriented, as if I had stepped into someone else's life. Someone whose evenings included classical concerts, intimate dinners, and goodnight kisses from distinguished doctors. But as I moved through my familiar rooms, now softly illuminated by the Christmas lights Judith had helped me hang, I realized this wasn't someone else's life. It was mine, finally expanding beyond the narrow confines I had accepted for so long. I was still smiling the next morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Vanessa's number, which was unusual enough to give me pause. In our years of knowing each other, Vanessa had rarely called me directly, preferring to leave communication with me to Thomas. Curiosity won out, and I answered. "Hello, Vanessa." "Eleanor." Her voice was taut with controlled emotion. "I think we need to talk." "All right," I said cautiously. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," she said quickly. "Could we meet for coffee today, if possible?" The request was so unexpected that I momentarily wondered if it was some kind of trap or manipulation, but Vanessa sounded genuinely distressed, not calculating. "Could meet you at the cafe on Main Street at noon," I offered. "Perfect. Thank you. I'll see you then." She hung up abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. What could Vanessa possibly want to discuss with me alone that couldn't be said over the phone? And why the urgency? I spent the morning alternating between curiosity and apprehension about the upcoming meeting. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, settling into a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Despite the festive decorations and cheerful holiday music playing softly in the background, I couldn't shake my apprehension. Vanessa had never sought me out before, and the urgency in her voice had been uncharacteristic. When she walked in precisely at noon, I barely recognized her. The polished, confident woman who had always looked at me with cool assessment was gone. In her place was someone with shadows under her eyes, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and none of her usual impeccable makeup. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, clothing I'd never seen her in before. "Eleanor," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, studying her face. Up close, I could see she'd been crying. "Are you all right?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not particularly, no." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I hardly know where to begin." I signaled the waitress, and we both ordered coffee. When the waitress moved away, I said gently, "Why don't you start with why you wanted to see me?" Vanessa took a deep breath. "Thomas doesn't know I'm here. He'd be furious if he found out." She looked down at her hands. "Things have escalated since your conversation with my father." The waitress returned with our coffees, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. Vanessa added sugar too, hers with trembling hands, stirring longer than necessary. "My parents have withdrawn their invitation for Christmas," she finally said. "They're claiming it's because you refused their reasonable solution to our financial issues." I felt a flash of indignation. "Their solution was to pay me to continue subsidizing your lifestyle." "I know," Vanessa said, surprising me. "It was insulting and manipulative, and I told them so." I stared at her, trying to reconcile this statement with everything I knew about Vanessa. "You did?" she nodded, not meeting my eyes. "It led to quite a fight. I've never spoken to my father that way before, but—" She trailed off, then seemed to steel herself. "The truth is, Eleanor, everything is falling apart. The bank called yesterday about the mortgage. Thomas is talking about taking out a high-interest loan to cover it. My credit cards are maxed out. And my parents—" Her voice broke. They've made it clear that they won't help unless we agree to sell the house and move into something they consider appropriate for our income level. I see, I said carefully. And what does Thomas say about that? He refuses to consider it. He says it would be admitting defeat, that it would damage his professional reputation. She looked up at me, her gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He's becoming someone I don't recognize, Eleanor. Desperate, angry, obsessed with appearances. Last night, he suggested we pawn my engagement ring to make the mortgage payment. I couldn't hide my shock. That doesn't sound like Thomas. It's not, she agreed. Or at least it wasn't. But this situation is bringing out the worst in both of us. She took a shaky sip of her coffee. We've been fighting constantly. He blames me for the Christmas disinvitation. I blame him for our financial mess. Her voice dropped. I'm beginning to wonder if our marriage can survive this. The raw vulnerability in her voice touched something in me. Despite everything, she was still my son's wife, still family in some complicated way. Why? Are you telling me this, Vanessa? I asked gently. She looked directly at me then, her expression more open than I'd ever seen it. Because I need advice from someone who loves Thomas but isn't blinded by social climbing and status the way my family is. And because... She hesitated. Because I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I waited, giving her space to continue. I've treated you terribly, she said quietly. I've been dismissive, condescending, ungrateful. I've accepted your financial support while excluding you from our lives. I believed what my parents taught me, that connections and appearances matter more than authentic relationships. She wiped away a tear that had escaped. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology was unexpected and seemed genuine. I felt some of my resentment softening, though caution remained. Thank you for saying that, I said. But I'm still not clear on what you want from me now. Vanessa ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from her before. I don't know exactly. Guidance, maybe? You raised Thomas. You and Harold managed your finances responsibly all those years. Our parents set terrible examples. His father died young, and mine measure everything by social status. She looked desperate. I don't want to lose my marriage over money and pride, but I don't know how to fix this. I considered her words carefully. There was something genuine in her distress that moved me, despite our history. The first step would be honest communication, I said finally. With Thomas, with your parents, with yourselves about what you can truly afford. Thomas won't listen, she said miserably. He's convinced that if he just works harder, takes on more clients, impresses the right people, everything will magically resolve itself. Then perhaps you need to make some decisions independently, I suggested. What matters most to you, Vanessa? The house in Lakeview Estates? Your marriage? Your relationship with your parents? She was quiet for a long moment. When you put it that way, it seems obvious. The house is just a house. But I've never gone against my parents before. And Thomas... She trailed off again. Thomas has always responded better to action than words, I observed, remembering his childhood stubbornness. You might need to force the issue. Vanessa nodded, slowly, seeming to come to a decision. Would you be willing to talk to him with me? He might listen to both of us together. The request gave me pause. I had been establishing healthy boundaries, stepping back from their financial drama. Getting re-involved could mean sliding back into old patterns. I can't go back to financially supporting you, I said firmly. I'm not asking you to, Vanessa said quickly. I would never ask that again. I just think he needs to hear the truth, from both of us. I sipped my coffee, weighing the request. I'll think about it, I said finally. But Vanessa, regardless of what I decide, you need to be prepared to make difficult choices. She nodded, looking simultaneously frightened and determined. I know, and I will. She gathered her purse, preparing to leave. Thank you for meeting me, and for listening." As she stood, she hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry you won't be with us for Christmas. That was wrong of us, of me." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much the simple acknowledgement meant. "I hope you and Thomas can find your way through this." After Vanessa left, I remained at the cafe, turning our conversation over in my mind. Her unexpected vulnerability and apology had caught me off guard. Was it genuine remorse, or simply the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed life was crumbling? And more importantly, what responsibility did I still have to help my son and his wife find their way through this crisis? For the next few days, I mulled over my conversation with Vanessa, weighing whether to intervene as she'd requested. Part of me wanted to maintain the boundaries I'd established, to protect myself from being drawn back into their financial drama. But another part couldn't ignore the genuine distress I'd seen in Vanessa's eyes. In the midst of this deliberation, I kept to my new routine: administrative shifts at the hospital, lunch with Grace to finalize Christmas dinner plans, an evening helping Judith plan our neighborhood garden club for spring. I even had dinner with Samuel again, this time at my house where I cooked Harold's special lasagna recipe. "You seem preoccupied," Samuel observed as we sat on my couch after dinner, sharing a bottle of wine. "Anything you want to talk about?" I hesitated, then told him about Vanessa's visit. "I'm torn," I admitted. "I've finally started putting myself first after decades of sacrifice, but it's hard to turn away when your child is in trouble," he finished for me. "Exactly. Even when that trouble is largely self-inflicted." Samuel considered this, swirling the wine in his glass. "What would helping look like in this situation? Not financial support, I assume." "No, definitely not that. Vanessa wants me to talk to Thomas with her, to help him understand they need to make significant changes." "That sounds reasonable," Samuel said. "Offering wisdom and perspective is different from enabling destructive behavior." His validation eased some of my conflicted feelings. "I suppose I'm afraid of being drawn back into their chaos." Samuel took my hand. "Eleanor, one of the things I admire most about you is your compassion. But compassion with boundaries is still compassion." His expression grew thoughtful. "When my daughter went through her divorce, I wanted to solve everything for her, pay her legal fees, move her back home, take care of her children. But my late wife's sister gave me wise advice. Help her find her own strength, not replace it with yours." Those words resonated deeply. Perhaps I could support Thomas and Vanessa in finding their own solution without sacrificing my hard-won boundaries. The decision was made for me the following morning when Thomas called. His voice sounded strained, nothing like his usual confident tone. "Mom," he said without preamble, "I think we need to talk, in person, about everything." We arranged to meet at my house that evening. As I prepared for their visit, straightening up and making a pot of Harold's comforting beef stew, I mentally rehearsed what I would and wouldn't say. I would be compassionate but firm. I would listen but not rescue. I would offer wisdom, but not money. They arrived looking like different people than the polished couple I was accustomed to seeing. Thomas's face was drawn with stress, his normally pristine appearance rumpled. Vanessa hung back slightly, uncertainty in her posture. "Come in," I said, opening the door wider. "Dinner's almost ready." "Mom, we didn't come for dinner," Thomas began. "I know why you came," I replied evenly. "But difficult conversations go better with food. Your father taught me that." A flicker of emotion crossed Thomas's face at the mention of Harold. He nodded, and they followed me to the kitchen, where the rich aroma of stew filled the air. For a few minutes, we moved through the familiar routines of a family meal, setting the table, pouring water, serving food. The normality of it seemed to ease some of the tension. As we ate, Thomas finally broke the silence. "Vanessa told me about your conversation at the cafe." I looked at Vanessa, who nodded slightly. "We need to be honest with each other," she said quietly. Thomas set down his spoon. "Mom, things have gotten complicated. The bank is threatening foreclosure. My in-laws are pressuring us to sell. Vanessa and I are fighting constantly." He ran a hand through his hair. "I feel like I'm drowning." The raw vulnerability in his voice reminded me of when he was small, coming to me with a scraped knee or a broken toy, trusting I could make everything better. But this wasn't a childhood injury I could kiss away. "What do you want from me, Thomas?" I asked gently. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know how we got here, how everything spiraled so far out of control." "I think you do know," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "You and Vanessa have been living beyond your means for years, prioritizing appearances over financial stability. I enabled that by covering your mortgage, which I take responsibility for, but the underlying choices were yours." Thomas flinched slightly at my directness, but he didn't deny it. "We're going to lose the house," Vanessa said quietly. "There's no way around it anymore." "No," Thomas protested. "There has to be another solution. If we could just get through the next few months, the partnership decision at the firm—" "Thomas," Vanessa interrupted, placing her hand over his. "The partnership isn't guaranteed, and even if it happens, it won't solve this overnight. We're too far underwater." I watched them, seeing something new in their interaction. Vanessa standing her ground, Thomas actually listening to her. "What? About downsizing?" I suggested. "Finding a home you can actually afford?" Thomas looked pained. "The housing market is terrible right now. We'd lose everything we've put into the house." "You've already lost it," I said gently. "That's the reality you need to accept. The question is what you'll do next." A heavy silence fell over the table. Finally, Thomas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For taking your support for granted. For excluding you from Christmas. For believing Vanessa's parents when they said you weren't." He trailed off, embarrassed. "When they said I wasn't sophisticated enough for their social circle." I finished for him. He nodded miserably. "It was wrong. I was wrong." The apology was unexpected and touched something deep inside me. Despite everything, this was still my son, the little boy I had loved and raised. "What about bankruptcy?" I asked. "Have you considered it?" Thomas looked shocked. "Bankruptcy. Mom, that would destroy my professional reputation. No one at the firm would take me seriously." "That's what my father said," Vanessa added. "But I've been researching it. Chapter 13 might actually help us restructure and keep some assets." I was surprised by Vanessa's practical approach. "It's worth exploring all options," I agreed, "including a fresh start." Thomas shook his head, still resistant. "I can't believe we're even discussing this. Dad would be so disappointed in me." "No," I said firmly. "Your father would be disappointed in the materialistic values that got you here, but he would never be disappointed in you for facing reality and making tough decisions to move forward." As the conversation continued into the evening, I maintained my resolve not to offer financial assistance. Instead, I listened, asked questions, and occasionally offered perspective from my own experience managing finances with Harold. Eventually, Thomas and Vanessa developed the outline of a plan. They would consult with a bankruptcy attorney, explore selling the house before foreclosure damaged their credit further, and Vanessa would take a higher-paying position her former colleague had offered at a different firm. As they prepared to leave, Thomas hung back while Vanessa went to the car. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "about Christmas. Vanessa and I were wondering if you might reconsider joining us. Not at her parents' anymore, obviously, but we thought maybe we could come here, have a simple meal together." He looked around my modestly decorated living room with new eyes. "Like we used to when I was growing up." The invitation touched me deeply. But I remembered Grace's dinner, the commitments I'd made to my new friends. "I've made other plans for Christmas Day," I said. "But perhaps you could join me for Christmas Eve? We could attend the candlelight service at the church where your father and I were married." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Very much." As I watched them drive away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: hope that Thomas and Vanessa were finally facing reality, cautious optimism about our healing relationship, and pride in myself for maintaining boundaries while still offering the support they truly needed. The Christmas Eve service was beautiful, the old stone church illuminated by hundreds of candles, the familiar carols filling the space. Thomas and Vanessa sat beside me in the pew where our family had sat every Christmas of Thomas's childhood. As we held our candles during the final hymn, the light reflecting on Thomas's face reminded me of Christmases past. Afterward, we returned to my house for hot chocolate and cookies, just as we had done when Thomas was small. The conversation was careful but genuine, focused on memories and small plans for the future, not on houses or status or appearances. On Christmas Day, I joined Grace's bustling household, filled with her children and grandchildren. I brought homemade cranberry bread, the same recipe that had been in my hands that day in Vanessa's foyer when everything changed. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I shared it with my new friends, who welcomed me with genuine warmth. Later that evening, I returned home to find Samuel waiting on my porch with a small gift. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he said, kissing my cheek. "I hope your day was wonderful." "It was different," I replied honestly. "But good different. How was yours?" "Better now," he said, taking my hand. As we sat in my living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly, I reflected on the journey of the past months. I had lost some illusions about my relationship with my son. Yes, but I had gained so much more: self-respect, new friendships, the beginning of romance, and perhaps a more honest connection with Thomas and Vanessa. The new year would bring challenges, helping Thomas and Vanessa navigate their financial restructuring while maintaining my boundaries, balancing my evolving relationship with Samuel against my need for independence, planning for a retirement that looked nothing like I had once imagined. But for the first time in decades, I was approaching my future with hope and enthusiasm, rather than duty and resignation. At 67, I was discovering that it wasn't too late to create a life centered on my own joy rather than others' expectations. As Samuel raised his glass in a toast, I silently thanked the painful awakening that had led me here, to this moment of unexpected contentment, to the revelation that roots and wings were gifts I deserved as well. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.